Now let's talk about reading comprehension. In a way, the phrase reading comprehension is misleading, like a mildly misleading false advertisement, because the name reading comprehension suggests a reading exercise that you're already familiar with, like reading a college textbook. You read a chapter in the Intro to Economics book, you memorize some details, and you answer some questions on the test. That's reading comprehension for most of us. But reading comprehension on the test is not really very much like ordinary reading. First, reading comprehension uses strange thoughts on exotic topics. The bewildering array of topics that have been used on previous administrations is truly astonishing. For example, a passage on globular clusters, that is stars, not candy bars. A nice biographical summary of the career of Florence Nightingale, but from a philosophical perspective, and a really cool passage on the altruistic behavior of Heterocephalus glaber. Cool, that is, if you happen to like naked mole rats, because that's what the Heterocephalus glaber is. And depending on how far you've progressed with your study in the ARCO book, you've seen a variety of other topics. Now these topics are selected because they are strange. The theory is that they are so obscure that no one will have an unfair advantage from having studied them before. Well, just to be sure, after the testing session is over, you might want to ask, or maybe not, as it might be impolite to ask total strangers about their feelings for the Heterocephalus glaber. Second point, despite the variety of topics, there is a constancy to the inconstancy. The passages are all taken from previously published material and then carefully edited in such a way that they can become the basis for the reading comprehension questions. Passages, for example, always develop a central theme, and this is often the basis for a question. Passages typically contain two or more contrasting viewpoints or perspectives, and these contrasts become the basis for questions. Key points are edited out of the passage so that questions can ask you to infer some conclusion about the missing material. In other words, the original passages themselves are editorially altered to produce grist for the test writer's mill. Additionally, there is constancy in the questions asked. In fact, there are exactly 6 kinds of questions that are asked over and over again. Main idea questions, explicit idea questions, implied idea questions, logical structure questions, application questions, and tone or attitude questions. We might even say that there are exactly 6 different questions used, and that's it. Plus, the right and wrong answers to these questions fall into discernible patterns that you can learn to identify. When you know about this constancy, you're in a much better position to read the passage for what's been put there by the test writer for you to read and answer the questions. Third point, this is an open book test. Now in college you had to read a textbook to cram a lot of facts into your brain. Read and memorize, however, would be the wrong approach to reading comprehension for the test. Instead, you have to read for the test itself, and that's our first review topic, reading the passage. The first thing that you'll need to do is, obviously, read the passage. But there is reading and there is reading. In the testing environment, you are less concerned about details than you are about development and structure. Your top priority is to understand the main point of the selection and how the selection is structured. You are only secondarily concerned with the details and then about their location so that you can find them if and when you need them. By preview, I mean to read the opening sentence or perhaps the opening 2 sentences of the passage, the first sentence of each subsequent paragraph, and the concluding sentence. The significance of some of the sentences may not be at all clear, at least not at first, but taken together they should give you a pretty good idea of what the main point is and how the author develops the argument. Let's preview a passage together. In the art of the Middle Ages, we never encounter the individual. Art of the Middle Ages is First, a sacred script. A second characteristic is obedience to a sacred mathematics. A third characteristic is a symbolic language. These, then, are the defining characteristics of art of the Middle Ages. This is what a preview would look like. Our passage deals with art in the Middle Ages and describes some of its defining characteristics. Now let's look at the questions associated with this particular passage, and you may need to look back at your copy of the book for some of the details. Okay, the first question is a main idea question, and the correct answer is C. Our selection discusses some of the important features of art in the Middle Ages. And now let's look at the wrong answers. A and D can be eliminated for essentially the same reason. The focus of the selection is on art of the Middle Ages. In the opening paragraph, the author mentions the artistic genius of centuries, and in the final paragraph, the Renaissance. But these oblique and brief mentions do not constitute the central point of the selection. B and E are wrong for the same reason. The Y takes us beyond the text as written. I stress that all main idea questions, whatever topic they may treat, can be handled in just this fashion. You'll immediately recognize a main idea question by its wording. Most use a phrase like main idea or main point or perhaps primary purpose. The correct answer is like a proper fitting coat, large enough to cover everything, but not so large as to be baggy. An answer that is too small because it describes only a part of the passage is wrong. An answer that is too large because it references extra textual material is wrong. The right answer fits comfortably. The second of the 6 types of questions is the explicit idea question, also called a specific detail question. This type of question asks about something explicitly stated in the passage. Sometimes the question stem will give you a specific line or paragraph reference. Sometimes the question will include a thought reverser, as this one does here. That's the except. The correct answer to this item is D. There's the idea that's not mentioned in the selection. If you consult the text of the passage in the book, you'll see that wavy lines may be used to represent water, or the sky and halos and cross to represent divinity. Clothing is mentioned as a way of identifying key personages, and various figures signal locations. For example, an attending angel near a city signifies that the city is Jerusalem. D, however, is not mentioned. So given the presence of the thought reverser in the question stem, D is the correct answer. Explicit idea or detail questions can be identified by their characteristic wording. Sometimes the question will be phrased as the author mentions or the passage states. Or the question may be introduced by a phrase such as according to the author or according to the selection. These and other variations are signals that the idea that is the basis for the correct answer is specifically mentioned somewhere in the selection, though perhaps in different words, of course. All you have to do is find it. Now, the wrong answers fall into one of 2 categories. Some answers are wrong because they reference extra textual material. That is, they go beyond the explicit scope of the passage and refer to something that sounds like it may be related, but is not actually ever discussed by the author. Remember that the correct choice to an explicit idea question is right there in the text. Other wrong choices are wrong because even though they are mentioned in the text, they don't answer the question asked. A favorite trick of the test writers is to create an answer that echoes an idea found in the passage, just not in the part that's relevant to the question being asked. So mention alone is not enough. The correct choice also has to answer the question asked. The third type of question is the inference question, also called the implied idea question. The inference question is somewhat like the explicit idea question, except that instead of the correct answers being explicitly stated, the correct answer is implied. So you have to read between the lines. The correct example, or the correct answer to our example here is B. In paragraph 3, the author states, "Every painting is an allegory." Now that doesn't say that the most common motif in painting of the Middle Ages is allegory in exactly those words, but it strongly implies that conclusion. Compare B with, say, A. The author says that numbers were important and gives an example or two, but this does not authorize the inference that every painting, or even almost every painting, contained elements representing the specific numbers 3 and 4. And the same reasoning applies to both C and D. These are said to be appropriate subjects for a painting of the Middle Ages, but nothing suggests that they were universal in the same way that every painting is an allegory is universal. Now finally, E is actually inconsistent with the passage because the individual painter does not figure prominently in the art of the Middle Ages. Inference questions usually have the characteristic inferred or implied or suggests wording, and that's how you'll recognize them. The correct answer, though not explicitly stated, is strongly implied in the text. For example, if the author makes a statement of the form, "if P then Q," and later says not Q, then you can infer not P as a matter of logic. An answer that expresses an idea contradictory to the text cannot be implied from the text, and so is wrong. And finally, answers that are merely speculative are wrong. This last point is very important. I know from many years of teaching for this test that some examinees create trouble for themselves by trying to show that almost any idea can be arguably inferred from the text. Now look, as a matter of mental exercise, there's nothing wrong with this. But in the testing environment, it is extremely dangerous to your score. The correct answer to an inference question is strongly implied. You don't have to speculate wildly. The fourth type of question used by reading comprehension is the structure question. A structure question, as the name implies, asks about the way the passage is developed. Structure questions may ask about specific points developed by the author or about the passage as a whole. Our example here asks about a specific point. Why does the author mention St. Augustine? And the correct answer is E. At the relevant point, the author has just mentioned that art of the Middle Ages is characterized by a passion for numbers. The reason for the quotation is to give an example of this general respect for numbers. Logical structure questions ask either about details or about the development of the selection as a whole. When the question asks about a detail, it is asking not what the author says, that would be an explicit idea question, but why the author says it. So the correct answer must explain why the author mentions something. A logical structure question may also ask about the overall development of the selection. This type of question is very much like a main idea question in its wording, except that it's likely to contain a phrase such as overall development or author's argument. A global logical structure question is answered in much the same way as a main idea question. To use the coat analogy, the answer needs to fit properly. Not too small, not too large, but comfortable. The fifth type of question used by reading comprehension is the further application question. A further application question asks you to take information from the passage and apply it to a new context. Let's look at our example. The passage would most likely be found in a sociological analysis, a treatise on the Church's influence, a scholarly analysis of art, a preface on a biography of St. Augustine, a pamphlet on religious beliefs. And the correct answer is C. Of course, you can't really know where the passage originally appeared, so the task is to pick the most likely source from those offered in the choices. And C is a possibility given the scholarly tone of the selection. A is surely wrong because the passage doesn't discuss sociology. And B is wrong because the focus is specifically art and not religion. D isn't likely because there's but a single reference to Augustine. And E must be wrong because pamphlet is not consistent with the scholarly tone of the selection. Further application questions are the most abstract and therefore the most difficult of all the reading comprehension questions. They really differ from inferred idea questions only in a matter of degree. While the answer to an inferred idea question is strongly implied by the text, the right answer to a further application question may be only weakly supported. It's right because it's the best of the worst. I wish I could tell you more than that, but I can't. It's simply not possible. So the best that you can do is eliminate as many answer choices for any reason whatsoever and be prepared to guess. On the other hand, on the good news department, if you are working on a string of further application questions, since those are usually the most difficult, then you're working on a top score up at the top of the ladder of difficulty. And there you can't expect for there to be easy answers. The final category of questions is attitude or tone. And if further application questions are the most difficult, then attitude or tone questions are the easiest. Look at our example. The correct answer is A. The tone of the passage is clearly one of appreciation, in the sense that the author both understands and admires the art. And this conclusion is further supported by the contrast between art of the Middle Ages and religious art of the Renaissance, a theme developed at the end of the selection. B, however, overstates the case. The author discusses only one period of art, with only casual references to the periods that came before and after. We can't conclude on this basis that the author considers the art of the Middle Ages the best art of all time. D and E go too far in the opposite direction. The author has a positive attitude toward the art discussed, and C is simply wide of the mark. Since tone or attitude questions often use value judgments as choices, you can arrange choices on a continuum, from positive to negative or vice versa. Then locate the answer choice along the continuum that best describes the passage. And now a final word about good mechanics for answering reading comprehension items. Read the passage and answer the questions. Well, it's not quite that simple. First, read the passage. Begin by previewing the passage in the way that we did with the example of art in the Middle Ages. As you read, don't try to memorize details. Instead, try to remember where details appear. You can always return to the passage if a question asks about one or more specific points. If during your reading you encounter concepts that seem too difficult, mentally bracket that part of the selection and continue your reading. Read through the passage. Make sure you understand what role the difficult material plays in the development of the passage, but don't waste time trying to sort it out. In fact, that difficult material that you're struggling with may not even be the basis for a question. Finally, after you've read through the passage, pause. Summarize the development in your own mind, in your own words. This will help you with any main idea questions, and it will help you analyze any structure questions that you might be given. Then answer the questions. As you approach each question, try to determine what type of question it is according to its wording, the kind of wordings we've discussed earlier. Then, when you've established the category to which it belongs, remind yourself of what the right answer ought to look like and also of how the test writers create the distractors or wrong answers.